Abandoned at the altar, the billionaire never expected his secretary to save him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to the main character. He stood at the altar alone. The cathedral was enormous, built of white stone and tall arched windows, the kind of place meant to echo joy. Instead, it echoed whispers. Rows of polished wooden pews stretched behind him, half filled with people who had dressed for celebration and arrived just in time to witness humiliation. Daniel Hart was not a man who feared silence. As the chief executive officer of a multi-billion-dollar investment firm, he faced boardrooms filled with rivals who wanted his seat, his power, and his downfall. Silence never rattled him, but this silence was different. It pressed against his chest, heavy and public. The music had stopped 5 minutes ago. The priest glanced down at his watch, then up at Daniel, offering a polite, helpless smile. Cameras from society magazines hovered at the back of the church. His mother sat stiffly in the front row, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. A few board members exchanged looks they did not bother to hide. The bride was not coming. Daniel stared straight ahead, his posture perfect, his tailored suit flawless. From the outside, he looked composed, untouchable. Inside, his mind was racing through consequences, not heartbreak. This wedding was never about love. It was about control. 6 months earlier, his father's will had been read in a quiet law office overlooking Central Park. One sentence had changed everything. In order to retain full voting power over Hart Global, Daniel had to be married before the end of the fiscal year. Not engaged, not promised, married. His fiancée had agreed for reasons of her own. Status, security, proximity to power. It was a transaction, clean and simple, or so he believed, until this moment. A phone vibrated in his pocket. Daniel did not need to look to know it was another unanswered message. He had sent 12 already, each one shorter than the last, each one more urgent. Still nothing. The murmurs grew louder. This was not just a man being left at the altar. This was a billionaire losing leverage in front of witnesses. Daniel took a slow breath. He calculated exit strategies, public statements, damage control. But there was no solution for a groom abandoned mid-ceremony. Except one. His eyes shifted, almost without intention, toward the side aisle near the front. She was standing there, half hidden behind a stone column, holding a slim leather folder against her chest. Emily Carter, his executive secretary. She had been with him for 3 years. She managed his schedule down to the minute, filtered his calls, negotiated with his lawyers, and quietly prevented crises before they reached his desk. She knew every weakness in the company and never used a single one for her own gain. Right now, she was the only person in the building not watching him with pity or curiosity. She was watching him with concern. Their eyes met. In that instant, Daniel felt something unfamiliar. Not relief, not hope. Desperation. Emily took a small step forward, then stopped. Her expression said everything she did not dare say out loud. She knew what this wedding meant. She knew what failure would cost him. Daniel swallowed. He leaned slightly toward her as the priest cleared his throat and prepared to speak again. "Emily," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the chaos inside him. "I need your help." Her breath caught. Help with what? He looked at the empty aisle, where a bride should have been walking toward him. Then he looked back at the woman who had always stood behind him, never beside him. "Stay where you are," he said. "Do not answer yet." The doors at the back of the cathedral remained closed, and in that moment, as the entire room waited for the final collapse of his carefully built world, Daniel Hart made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. Daniel Hart had never begged anyone in his life. He negotiated, he demanded, he calculated, but he did not beg. Yet as he stood at the altar, with dozens of eyes fixed on him and his future unraveling by the second, he realized that pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. Emily remained where she was, her heels planted firmly on the marble floor, the leather folder still pressed against her chest, as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. She searched his face, trying to read what he was asking, without forcing him to say it out loud. The priest cleared his throat again. "Mr. Hart," he said gently, "would you like a few more minutes, or shall we—" "Give us a moment," Daniel said. His voice was calm, controlled, but it carried authority, the kind that did not invite argument. The priest nodded and stepped aside. The murmurs in the pews grew louder. Emily took another step forward. "Daniel," she whispered, careful not to let her voice carry. "What is happening?" He lowered his voice as well. "She is not coming." Emily already knew, but hearing it confirmed made her chest tighten. "If this ceremony does not happen," he continued, "I lose majority control of the company by Monday morning." Her eyes widened slightly, then steadied. "And you need time." "I need a wife," he said quietly. The words hung between them, sharp and dangerous. Emily shook her head once, instinctively. "I cannot just invent one." Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her, not as his secretary, not as the woman who made his impossible schedule work, but as the only person in the room who had not abandoned him. "I am not asking you to invent anything," he said. "I am asking you to stand next to me." She stared at him, stunned. "You cannot be serious." "I am," he said. "I would not ask if there were another option." Emily's thoughts raced. This was madness. This was crossing every line she had spent 3 years carefully respecting. Her career, her reputation, his power, his world. "You are asking me to walk down that aisle," she said, her voice barely steady, "and pretend to be your bride." "I am asking you to save me," Daniel replied. "Just today." The weight of the moment pressed down on her. She thought of the years she had worked behind the scenes, invisible by design. She thought of every crisis she had helped him survive, without anyone ever knowing her name. "I would need protection," she said slowly. He nodded immediately. "A contract, clear terms, legal guarantees. No emotional obligation," she added. "None," he said. "No interference in my career once this is over." "You will have more security than you have ever had," he replied. Emily exhaled. This was not romance. This was a transaction born of chaos. And yet, she could see something in his eyes she had never seen before. Fear. The doors at the back of the cathedral remained closed. A board member stood, whispering urgently to another. Cameras shifted, hungry for collapse. Emily looked down at her folder. Inside was the emergency schedule she had prepared in case of delays. She had always planned for everything. Everything except this. "If I do this," she said, lifting her gaze, "we walk out together, as equals, in front of everyone." Daniel did not hesitate. Agreed. She held his gaze for a long second, then nodded once. "Then you need to give me exactly 30 seconds. Emily turned and walked briskly toward the side room reserved for the bride. Gasps rippled through the cathedral as she disappeared behind the door. Daniel remained at the altar, heart pounding for the first time in years. He had bet his empire on market shifts and mergers before. None of those risks felt like this. The side door opened. The music began again, soft and hesitant. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Emily stepped into view, no longer the woman standing in the shadows, but someone entirely new. She walked with calm purpose, her expression composed, her eyes locked on Daniel. In that moment, the empty wedding was no longer empty, and Daniel Hart understood, with sudden clarity, that saving his empire might cost him something far more dangerous than control. It might cost him his heart. The applause came slowly at first, polite, confused, uncertain. Then it grew louder, filling the cathedral with a sound that felt unreal. People rose to their feet, clapping not out of joy, but out of relief that a scandal had been narrowly avoided. To them, the story was simple. The bride had been delayed. The ceremony was back on track. Only Daniel and Emily knew the truth. As she reached the altar, Daniel offered his arm. Emily took it, her fingers light but steady. Her pulse was racing, but her face remained calm. Years of standing beside powerful men had taught her how to wear composure like armor. The priest resumed the ceremony, his voice warm, his words familiar. Vows were spoken. Rings were exchanged. When Daniel slipped the ring onto Emily's finger, his hand hesitated for half a second longer than necessary. Emily noticed. So did he. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, the applause erupted again. Cameras flashed. Smiles appeared where suspicion had been moments before. Daniel leaned closer and whispered, "Thank you." Emily did not look at him. "We will discuss this later," she replied softly. The reception passed in a blur. Emily stood at Daniel's side as guests approached with congratulations and carefully worded compliments. Board members nodded with approval. His mother embraced her, eyes damp with relief. "You saved us all today," she whispered. Emily smiled politely, though her chest felt tight. Daniel watched her navigate the room with quiet competence, answering questions, deflecting curiosity, never revealing more than necessary. She had stepped into the role flawlessly, too flawlessly. By the time the last guest left and the final camera was packed away, the exhaustion hit her all at once. Daniel dismissed the staff early and guided her into a private conference room adjacent to the cathedral. The door closed behind them, sealing off the noise and the expectations. For the first time since the ceremony began, they were alone. Emily exhaled sharply. "We need to formalize this now." Daniel nodded. "My attorney is waiting." As if on cue, the door opened, and his lawyer entered with a slim briefcase. No questions were asked. Papers were laid out across the table. The contract was thorough. Marriage in name only. Separate residences. No physical obligation. A fixed term of 12 months, with a public dissolution clause once corporate conditions were satisfied. Emily read every page carefully. "You anticipated this," she said quietly. Daniel did not deny it. "I plan for risk." She looked up at him then. "Did you plan for me?" "No," he admitted. "That is why this worked." She signed. So did he. The lawyer gathered the documents and left without ceremony. Silence settled between them. "This changes nothing," Daniel said. "Your position remains the same." Emily stood. "That is where you are wrong." She met his eyes, no longer just his secretary, no longer just his solution. "From this moment on," she continued, "I am your wife in public. That means your reputation is now tied to mine. I will not be treated as an accessory." Daniel studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "You will be treated as a partner." She accepted that, for now. Outside, a car waited to take them to separate destinations, as agreed. But as they walked side by side toward the exit, Daniel felt an unfamiliar tension. This marriage was supposed to be controlled, temporary, safe. Yet the woman walking beside him was no longer invisible. And for the first time since his father's death, Daniel Hart realized he had invited something unpredictable into his carefully ordered life. Something he could not manage with contracts alone. The next morning, the world woke up married to a story it did not fully understand. Headlines filled financial news sites and social columns alike. Billionaire CEO marries in private ceremony. Daniel Hart secures future of Hart Global. The photos showed carefully chosen angles. Daniel calm and composed. Emily elegant, reserved, impossible to read. Inside the penthouse apartment Daniel had arranged for her, Emily stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring down at the city she had navigated for years from behind a desk. Now, every light below felt closer, louder, watching. Her phone buzzed constantly, messages from colleagues, distant relatives, people who had never known her name now eager to claim proximity. She did not answer any of them. A soft knock came at the door. Daniel entered, jacket already off, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. He looked exactly as he always did when preparing for a difficult meeting. "We have our first public appearance tonight," he said. Emily turned slowly. "Tonight?" "A charity gala, already scheduled. Canceling would raise questions." She nodded once. "Then we should review expectations." They sat across from each other at the kitchen island. The contract opened between them like a neutral witness. "In public," Daniel said, "we present unity, confidence, no hesitation. And in private," Emily replied, "we respect boundaries." Agreed. The car ride to the gala was silent, but not uncomfortable. Emily watched reflections slide across the tinted glass. Daniel reviewed notes on his phone, then stopped and set it aside. "You handled the reception yesterday better than anyone I know," he said. "That was my job," she answered. "It is no longer just your job." She met his gaze briefly, then looked away. The gala unfolded exactly as predicted. Cameras, donors, questions disguised as compliments. Emily moved beside Daniel with quiet precision, responding when appropriate, smiling when required, grounding him when conversations veered toward speculation. She noticed things no one else did. Which investors watched her too closely? Which reporters circled, waiting for a mistake? When Daniel's hand hovered near hers during a particularly aggressive exchange, she did not pull away. Later that night, as they stood on a balcony overlooking the city, the noise softened. "You are adapting quickly," Daniel said. "I have always adapted," Emily replied. "You just never had to see it." He considered that. Days turned into weeks. Emily attended meetings as Daniel's wife and quietly influenced decisions as his most trusted advisor. Staff adjusted. Some resented her. Others followed her lead without question. Daniel found himself asking for her opinion before finalizing choices he once made alone. One evening, after a tense board meeting, Daniel paused outside her office. "You challenged me in there," he said. "I challenged the idea," she corrected. "Not you." A pause, then a nod. That night, Emily returned to her apartment and removed the ring, setting it carefully on the counter. She stared at it longer than she intended. This marriage was supposed to be controlled, predictable. Yet something was shifting, not in headlines, not in contracts, but in the quiet spaces where neither of them were pretending. And Emily realized, with a mix of resolve and unease, that the most dangerous part of this arrangement was no longer public scrutiny. It was how natural it was beginning to feel. The first real test came without warning. It happened during a quarterly leadership dinner at Hart Global, the kind of event designed to look informal while every word spoken carried weight. Long tables, low lighting, expensive restraint. The board members sat scattered among senior executives, watching Daniel closely, and watching Emily even more. She felt it the moment they entered the room, the subtle pause in conversations, the way eyes lingered just a second too long. She was no longer being assessed as an assistant who had risen too far. She was being measured as a liability. Daniel sensed it too. He placed a hand at the small of her back as they took their seats, a gesture that felt automatic and deliberate all at once. Emily did not flinch. She leaned into it just enough for others to notice. Dinner progressed smoothly until Richard Coleman spoke. Richard was one of the oldest board members, a man who had built his reputation on patience and precision. He lifted his glass slowly, smiling as if offering a compliment. "Daniel," he said, "we have all been impressed by how quickly you resolved your wedding complication." A few quiet chuckles followed. Emily kept her expression neutral. Richard continued, his gaze shifting toward her. "Though I must admit, many of us are still curious. Mrs. Hart, is it not unusual to step into such a role with so little notice?" The room fell silent. This was the moment they had been waiting for. A public test, disguised as civility. Daniel inhaled, preparing to speak. Emily answered first. "I believe uncertainty reveals more about leadership than preparation ever does," she said calmly. Daniel did not need someone perfect. He needed someone present. A murmur rippled through the room. Richard raised an eyebrow. "And you believe you are that person?" Emily met his gaze without hesitation. "I know I am." Daniel turned to look at her, surprised. She did not look back. After the dinner, Daniel followed her into the hallway outside the private dining room. "You did not have to do that," he said quietly. "Yes, I did," Emily replied. "If I cannot stand beside you when it is uncomfortable, this arrangement will fail." He studied her, then nodded. "You protected the company." "I protected us," she corrected. Later that night, Daniel stood alone in his office, city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass. He realized he had not once worried about Emily embarrassing him, not once questioned her judgment. That was new. Days later, a crisis hit. A hostile investor began circulating rumors that the marriage was staged, that Emily was nothing more than a convenient stand-in. The press caught the scent immediately. Daniel called an emergency meeting. When the accusations surfaced, Emily did not defend herself. She waited. Daniel stood and addressed the room. "My wife is not a distraction," he said. "She is an asset. Anyone who questions her position questions my judgment." The room went quiet. Emily felt something shift inside her chest. He had defended her without calculation, without needing to. That night, as they stood together in the elevator, the silence felt different. "I did not expect that," she said softly. "Neither did I," Daniel admitted. For the first time, the space between them felt smaller. Not because of obligation, not because of appearances, but because both of them were beginning to realize the truth they had carefully avoided. This marriage might have started as a solution, but it was becoming something neither of them could control. The closeness crept in quietly, not through grand gestures or dramatic confessions, but through moments so small they almost went unnoticed. Late nights became routine. Daniel would leave his office after midnight and find Emily still awake in the adjacent study, reviewing reports he had not asked her to check. She would glance up, offer a brief update, then return to her work without expectation of praise. At first, he told himself it was efficiency. Then he realized he had started waiting for those updates. One evening, after a long day of negotiations, Daniel arrived home visibly tense. He loosened his tie but did not remove it, pacing the living room with a controlled restlessness Emily had learned to recognize. "They are pushing again," he said finally. "They want to force a vote." Emily set aside her tablet. "And you think they will win?" "I think they believe I am distracted," he replied, "that I made an emotional decision." She studied him for a moment. "Did you?" The question caught him off guard. "I made a necessary one," he said. Emily stood and crossed the room, stopping a careful distance away. "Then act like it." He looked at her, uncertain. "Stop isolating yourself," she continued. "Let them see stability. Let them see us." The word us lingered in the air longer than either of them expected. Daniel nodded slowly. "All right." The next weeks were a test of endurance. Interviews, events, charity functions scheduled back to back. Emily moved through them with growing confidence, no longer mirroring Daniel's presence, but complementing it. People noticed. Staff began deferring to her without hesitation. Executives sought her input before approaching Daniel. Even the board, wary at first, started to listen when she spoke. Daniel watched it happen with a mix of admiration and unease. One night, after a particularly long fundraiser, Emily slipped off her heels the moment they entered the penthouse. She sank onto the couch with a quiet sigh, pressing her fingers into her temples. "You are exhausted," Daniel said. "So are you," she replied. He hesitated, then poured 2 glasses of water and handed her one. Their fingers brushed. Neither of them moved away. "You did not have to stay tonight," he said. "You could have left early." She met his eyes. "And let them think you were alone?" Something tightened in his chest. For a moment, the world outside the windows faded. No contracts, no headlines, just the quiet hum of the city and the awareness of how close she was. Emily stood abruptly. "We should be careful." He nodded. "Yes." But neither of them said why. The distance returned, but it was thinner now, fragile. Days later, Emily received an invitation addressed to her alone. A private luncheon hosted by one of Daniel's longtime allies. The implication was clear. A test. At the table, the questions were polite but sharp. How long had she known Daniel? What had drawn her to him? Whether she planned to maintain a role in the company. Emily answered calmly, honestly. "I do not intend to disappear," she said. "I intend to contribute." The response was met with silence, then nods. That evening, Daniel listened as she recounted the lunch. "They were testing your loyalty," he said. "They were testing your judgment," she corrected. He smiled faintly. "And?" "I passed," she said. So did he. Later that night, as they stood side by side at the window, Daniel realized something unsettling. He trusted her, not because of a contract, not because of necessity, but because she had become the one person who saw him clearly and chose to stay anyway. And that realization frightened him more than any hostile takeover ever had. The tension finally broke the night Daniel least expected it. It happened after a late board strategy session that stretched well past midnight. The meeting itself had gone smoothly, almost too smoothly, but Daniel felt the unease settle in his chest the moment he stepped out of the conference room. Emily noticed immediately. "You are holding back," she said, as they rode the elevator down in silence. He exhaled slowly. "They are preparing something." "Who?" "Not the board," he replied. "Someone closer." The doors opened to the underground garage. The car ride home was quiet, but not calm. When they entered the penthouse, Daniel loosened his tie and set it down with more force than necessary. "They are going after you," he said finally. Emily froze. "What do you mean?" "One of the investors contacted my legal team," he continued. "They are questioning your role, your background. They want proof that this marriage is legitimate." Emily felt the floor shift beneath her. And if they do not get it, they will force a public review, Daniel said. A hearing, every detail exposed. Silence stretched between them. This is my fault, Emily said quietly. I never should have agreed to this. Daniel turned sharply. Do not say that. You built your life on control, she said, and I brought uncertainty into it. He stepped closer. You brought stability. They just do not like that they cannot control you. Emily looked away, her jaw tight. If this becomes public, I will step aside. No, Daniel said immediately. She met his eyes. I will not be the reason you lose everything. The words hit him harder than any threat ever had. He realized then how much she had already sacrificed. Her anonymity, her peace, her safety, all without complaint. You are not disposable, he said. Not to them, not to me. Her voice softened. Daniel, this was never supposed to be real. I know, he replied. But the problem was, it was becoming real in ways neither of them could undo. The next morning the story broke anyway. An anonymous source leaked doubts about the marriage to the press. Headlines questioned motives. Talk shows speculated openly. Commentators reduced Emily to a convenient solution, a placeholder with ambition. Emily did not watch any of it. She packed a small bag instead. Daniel found her in the bedroom, folding clothes with careful precision. What are you doing? He asked. I am creating distance, she said. If I leave temporarily, the noise will die down. He stepped forward. You are running. I am protecting you, she corrected. His voice lowered. By disappearing? She hesitated. By removing the target. Daniel reached out and stopped her hands. Look at me. She did. I cannot keep pretending this does not matter, he said. You matter. Her breath caught. This arrangement started as a contract, he continued, but somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like one. Emily swallowed hard. Daniel, if we cross that line, there is no going back. I am aware, he said, and I am tired of living like everything meaningful is a liability. The silence between them was heavy, charged, fragile. For the first time, neither of them were speaking as strategist or secretary, not as billionaire and wife by contract, just as two people standing at the edge of a truth they could no longer ignore. Outside, the city continued on, unaware that behind those glass walls, a carefully controlled world was beginning to fracture. And this time, neither of them knew how to stop it. The reckoning came at the annual Heart Global Foundation Gala. It was the one event Daniel could not cancel without confirming every rumor already circulating. Investors, media, and political figures filled the grand ballroom, crystal lights reflecting off marble floors, polished to perfection. Everything looked controlled, except the tension beneath it. Emily stood beside Daniel as cameras flashed. Her posture was composed, her expression unreadable. Inside, she had already made her decision. If tonight ended badly, she would walk away quietly and let him reclaim his life without her shadow. Daniel sensed it. You are thinking about leaving again, he said under his breath. I am thinking about survival, she replied. Before he could respond, a familiar voice cut through the room. Richard Coleman stepped onto the small stage reserved for donor acknowledgments. He smiled, waiting for silence. Tonight, Richard began, we celebrate transparency, integrity, and trust. Values that define leadership. Emily felt Daniel's hand tense slightly around hers. Richard continued, which is why I believe it is appropriate to address the questions many of our partners have raised. Questions about authenticity. A hush fell over the room. This marriage, Richard said, turning toward Daniel and Emily, has drawn significant attention. Some have suggested it was arranged for convenience rather than commitment. Cameras shifted instantly. Emily felt the weight of every gaze. This was the moment she had prepared for. Daniel stepped forward. No, Emily said quietly, stopping him. He looked at her, startled. She released his hand and took one step ahead of him, her voice steady as it carried across the room. You are right, she said, meeting Richard's gaze. This marriage did not begin as a love story. Gasps rippled through the audience. Daniel's heart pounded. Emily. She raised a hand gently, never taking her eyes off the crowd. It began as a solution, she continued. A solution to a crisis that would have destroyed a company and countless livelihoods. I agreed to it, knowing the cost. Richard smiled thinly. So you admit it was a contract? Yes, Emily said, and that contract ends tonight. The room erupted in whispers. Daniel turned fully toward her. What are you doing? She faced him now, her expression soft but resolute. Giving you your freedom. She reached into her clutch and removed the folded contract, its edges worn from being carried too long. Slowly, deliberately, she tore it in half. Then again. The sound was quiet, but it echoed. Daniel felt something inside him snap. He stepped forward, his voice calm but unmistakably final. There is no contract, he said to the room. Not because it failed, but because I am done hiding behind it. He turned to Emily. You were never a placeholder, he said. You were the one person who stayed when walking away would have been easier. He faced the audience again. If any of you believe I need a transaction to lead this company, you are welcome to test that assumption. But this woman, he said, gesturing to Emily, is here by choice, and so am I. Silence swallowed the ballroom. Richard said nothing. Emily felt her breath catch. She had planned to disappear quietly. She had not planned for this. Daniel reached for her hand again, openly this time. No more pretending, he said softly. No more protection through distance. For the first time since the wedding day, Emily did not think about consequences. She did not think about headlines or power. She simply stayed. And in that moment, the truth became undeniable. What had started as a strategy had ended as a choice, and neither of them were willing to walk away from it anymore. The fallout was quieter than anyone expected. There were no dramatic resignations, no market collapse. Hart Global stock dipped briefly, then stabilized. Investors recalculated. The board retreated into silence. Richard Coleman submitted his resignation 2 weeks later, citing personal reasons. Daniel accepted it without comment. The world moved on. For the first time in months, Daniel and Emily found themselves without an emergency to manage. No headlines to answer. No appearances to perform. Just space. They took advantage of it. Daniel insisted on stepping back from the penthouse, choosing instead a smaller townhouse he had purchased years earlier and never lived in. It felt neutral, untouched by contracts and expectations. Emily arrived with one suitcase. This is temporary, she said out of habit. Daniel smiled faintly. So was everything else. The days that followed were simple in ways neither of them were used to. Mornings without schedules mapped to the minute. Dinners without agendas. Conversations that wandered without purpose. Emily learned that Daniel drank his coffee black, not because he liked it that way, but because it reminded him of his father. Daniel learned that Emily had once turned down a scholarship to stay close to her younger sister after their mother passed away. They were not dramatic revelations, but they mattered. One evening, as they walked through a quiet park near the river, Daniel stopped abruptly. "There is something I need to ask you," he said. Emily turned, her expression cautious but open. "All right?" "When this began," he continued, "I asked you to save me. Then I asked you to stay. I have not yet asked you the only thing that actually matters." He reached into his pocket and removed a small velvet box. Emily inhaled sharply. "Daniel, this is not a contract," he said gently. "There are no terms, no timelines, no guarantees. If you say no, nothing changes except my honesty." He opened the box, revealing a simple ring, elegant, unassuming. "Chosen with care, not strategy. I am asking you," he said, voice steady, "to marry me, not as my solution, not as my shield, but as my partner, because I choose you." Emily felt tears blur her vision. She thought of the woman who had stood in the shadows, the secretary who fixed crises quietly, the wife who stepped into a wedding meant for someone else. Then she thought of who she was now. "Yes," she said, "but only if we do this our way." Relief crossed his face, followed by something softer. "Name it." "No press," she said. "No board, no performance." He nodded. Agreed. They married again 3 months later. This time the ceremony was small, a quiet garden, a handful of friends. Emily wore a simple dress she chose herself. Daniel wore a suit he had owned long before Hart Global existed. There were no cameras, only laughter. As they stood together, hands entwined, Daniel realized something that had eluded him his entire life. Control had never protected him. Connection had. Emily squeezed his hand, as if sensing the thought. They had begun as a contingency plan, a last resort. They ended as a choice. And for the first time, neither of them were afraid of what came next. Because this time, they were not standing at an empty altar. They were standing exactly where they belonged.